Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. This will be a decisive week for European security. EU leaders are facing important questions over military spending and the need to rearm member states. As the US drifts further away from the center of the Western alliance, it is now up to Europe to decide the direction of future defense cooperation. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will send out a letter to EU leaders on how to rearm Europe. EU leaders are discussing a plan to increase defense spending following the recent crisis between the US and Ukraine. The most important film awards have been handed out. However, this year's Oscars sparked quite a bit of controversy. From Washington to London, this was a turbulent week in the world of foreign diplomacy and defense cooperation. Ahead of an extraordinary European Council summit set to take place in Brussels on Thursday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will send out a letter to EU leaders on how to rearm Europe. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins is in the Belgian capital and has more.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will send a letter to member states on Tuesday regarding her plan on rearming Europe. She first flagged the proposal on Sunday in London following high-level talks where European leaders discussed the rapid-fire developments of the Ukraine-Russia ceasefire. Now, the member states will be discussing this proposal at a European Council summit in Brussels, where Ukrainian defence and European security sit at the top of that docket. It follows a disastrous press appearance from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Donald Trump, in which the 47th President of the United States chastised that Ukrainian leader for, quote, flirting with World War III and for not accepting a ceasefire deal. But here is what the head of the European Commission executive told reporters today regarding that rearmament proposal.
We need a massive surge in defence without any question. We want lasting peace, but lasting peace can only be built on strength. And strength begins with strengthening ourselves. And that is the purpose of the plan that I will present to the Member States tomorrow, the Rearm Europe.
Member states are expected to discuss the proposal on Thursday, as well as other issues such as whether Europe should send security guarantees to Ukraine to ensure a long and just lasting peace is secured there. But what we already know is that Hungary and Slovakia have threatened to torpedo any discussions regarding this matter. But here is what European Council President Antonio Costa said about the importance of these dialogues from a press conference in Moldova.
I'm convening a special European Council to approve, take concrete decisions to increase our defence own capabilities, to become stronger, more autonomous and more able to defend ourselves, but also to continue to support Ukraine.
European leaders are also expected to finalise a military package to Ukraine from the EU. This proposal was first flagged by the EU top foreign policy boss, Kaja Kallas, where she said that it was important to strengthen Ukraine on the battlefield and in the skies, so it was in a position of strength at the negotiating table with Russia. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
As danger looms and the US disengages from taking an active part in European security, the EU must brace itself to take more responsibility. But the question remains, is the European defense industry capable of meeting the demand? And what actions could the EU take to facilitate the rearming of the continent? Marek Steele has this report.
Much of Sunday's summit was devoted to increasing military spending. Ursula von der Leyen announced she would present a plan called Rearm Europe at the European Council meeting on March 6th.
We are looking towards March 6th with caution, but hope that it will be a very clear message, showing Putin and Russia that no one here from the West intends to submit to his blackmail and aggression.
There are several options on the European table when it comes to increasing funding for defense. One of them involves an exemption of debt rules for defensive projects.
European Commission can't really buy tanks or planes or munition, but it can incentivize support European countries if they decide to buy either for Ukraine or for themselves.
French President Emmanuel Macron wants to raid EU cohesion funds and transfer resources from existing funding programs that he says aren't being used.
For the past 3 years, the Russians have been spending 10% of their GDP on defense. We need to prepare for what comes next, with an objective to spend 3 to 3.5% of GDP.
The summit has affected the continent's stock markets. German giant Rheinmetall's shares opened at almost 22% higher than they closed on Friday.
The stock market has also realized that Europe is more on its own and has to defend itself accordingly, and that the US has taken a back seat as a reliable partner.
The question remains whether European nations' defense industries have the capability to produce more.
One of the biggest problems industry has is the planability. Do you have a short-term surge in certain orders, or do you have a long-term contract?
One of the Polish army's main problems is insufficient local production of artillery ammunition crucial in warfare. Poland produces about 50,000 155mm shells per year. Such capacity would not be sufficient for a country at war. The Ukrainians use up to 300,000 rounds of ammunition of this caliber every month.
The UK has hosted a summit on Ukraine that continues to dominate international headlines. Our correspondent Sonia Gatabiszczan, who has been closely monitoring the latest on the London meeting, spoke to experts and Brits alike to learn about the reactions to last weekend's developments.
As we await more clarity on the developments stemming from the Ukraine Defense Summit hosted this Sunday, we thought it would be interesting to get a UK perspective on things. Dan Riddler from The Economist shared with us his views on the importance of London hosting the summit.
So for the UK, this is a really great opportunity to use its power as a convening power. So to get especially post-Brexit, to bring leaders together to discuss a topic on which the UK actually has some authority. It has a powerful European military, and to lend that ability to bridge the gap between the US, Europe.
And the general public seems to be rather welcoming of UK's support for Ukraine.
I think it's a good thing. I think that Russia is sort of impeaching on Ukraine's sovereignty, and I think as a member of sort of the global community, the UK does sort of have a responsibility to help Ukraine.
The country's under a lot of pressure, and everyone should rally round and help them.
In that sense, I'm incredibly thankful to live in a country that is actively speaking out in support of Ukraine.
The streets of London breathe in solidarity with Ukraine, and perhaps one explanation for that, other than common human empathy, is the tripartite agreement, an agreement that was signed between 3 countries that include UK, Ukraine, but also Poland.
And so the United Kingdom and Poland stand shoulder to shoulder, and that tripartite agreement in regard to Ukraine tells any country on earth all it needs to know about the vital importance of securing that peace and stability for Ukraine and its people.
Following the summit, its host, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, announced a £1.6 billion missile deal for Ukraine in a show of what he referred to earlier as his unwavering support for the country. From London, for TVP World, Sonia Gatabiszczan.
U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for saying that an end to Russia's war on Ukraine is still very, very far away. We now go live to Kyiv, where our Ukraine correspondent Oz Kataji has more. Good evening, Oz. So what more can you tell us about this latest development between the two presidents?
Well, this was a post put up on Truth Social, Donald Trump's own social media platform, criticizing comments made by President Zelensky to reporters in London on Sunday night. Let's take a look at what he said in his post.
This is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelensky, and America will not put up with it for much longer. It is what I was saying. This guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing, and Europe, in the meeting they had with Zelensky, stated flatly that they cannot do the job without the US. Probably not a great statement to have been made in terms of a show of strength against Russia. What are they thinking?
So Trump there lambasting not only President Zelensky again, but also European leaders rallying behind Ukraine. Now, we do have some more developments coming from Washington. According to the US press, Fox News reporting that Donald Trump isn't prepared for Zelensky to sign any mineral deal unless he gives a public apology on video for the events that took place in the Oval Office where J.D. Vance and Donald Trump berated President Zelensky. Furthermore, we also have from the New York Times reporting that Donald Trump is considering suspending all military aid to Ukraine, speaking with officials later on Monday evening. So, look, a lot of developments happening now between Washington and Ukraine, and not a lot of it is going in the direction that Zelensky's hoping for.
Thank you so much. That was Oz Kataji reporting live from Kyiv. Antonio Costa, president of the European Council, visited Chisinau on Monday, exactly 3 years to the day after Moldova signed its EU accession declaration. Costa's visit is meant to reinforce the EU's continued interest in having Moldova join the Union. Meanwhile, the results of the 2024 EU referendum showed that Moldovan society voted in favor of EU accession by only a slight margin. Paweł Trzaskowski has more on the story.
Antonio Costa visited Chisinau on Monday to mark the 3-year anniversary of Moldova's application for EU membership. The decision, which came close on the heels of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Back in those times, in a moment of profound crisis in the region, we have made a clear choice. We chose the peace, the freedom and the democracy.
By making the application, Moldova joined 8 other current EU candidate countries. To help bridge the gap between Moldova, a Soviet Socialist republic until 1991, and other EU member states, the bloc wants to provide Chisinau with a €1.8 billion investment package, including 60 million for strengthening the country's defense.
To provide peace in the Europe, and that's why we are supporting Moldova to defend their own independence.
In recent years, Moldova has been trying to strengthen its independence by giving up on Russian energy sources. However, now its energy security is coming under pressure from across the Atlantic. With Donald Trump's administration suspending support from US aid, 4 major energy projects in Moldova, worth over $200 million, could be halted. Chisinau says that it is currently discussing possible scenarios with the US, but is preparing solutions elsewhere.
If no, obviously we will discuss with other partners to see which way we can continue those projects which are extremely important for the citizens of the Republic of Moldova.
The European Union has already helped solve one energy crisis in the country. In January of this year, €64 million in non-repayable aid was granted by the European Commission to secure purchases of gas, therefore lowering the prices individual users have to pay for energy. This is important for the currently governing pro-European party, as high prices could sway the voters into the pro-Russian camp during the upcoming general election that will be held in September.
5 months. This is how long it took to shape a new Austrian government. For the first time in history, the country will see a 3-party government as centrist factions came together to shut out the far-right Freedom Party from obtaining power. Sasha Farbach has more.
After 5 months of political deadlock and uncertainty, Austria has a new government. It is the first time that the Alpine nation will be governed by a 3-party coalition. The country's president stressed the importance of the challenge ahead.
The war in Ukraine, geopolitical tensions and new security challenges require a clever peace and defence strategy, one that protects the interests of Austria and Europe and our peace.
One major issue will be to tackle migration, especially in light of a recent stabbing in the country that was linked to ISIS.
The current government has promised to take a very strict policy with regard to migration and asylum. They want to tighten the rules.
The government is composed of 3 parties, the conservative ÖVP, center-left SPÖ and liberal NEOS. It is the second attempt by the centrists to form a coalition and has also shut out the far-right Freedom Party from power, though they took the largest share of the vote in September. The new Chancellor, Christian Stocker, has taken an optimistic tone for the future.
The people of Austria can rely on the fact that this country comes first in every decision I make. I will fulfill this task with full awareness of this office.
Although Austria remains neutral and not part of NATO, the country supports Ukraine's sovereignty. It is also part of the European Sky Shield alongside 22 other nations. Some experts point to more defense cooperation ahead.
There has been a little bit of a rethink with the security relations. I think the current government will keep neutrality.
The political waltz took 5 months, but the new Austrian government looks to play a more active role in Europe. Time will tell how impactful that policy will be.
Sunday evening marked one of Hollywood's most important nights, the 97th Academy Awards. Sean Baker's Anora was one of the most decorated films of the night, but it did not end without controversy. With a story of a Russian oligarch's son marrying a sex worker and multiple Russian actors involved in the production, is Hollywood trying to make Russia cool again? Karolina Szaplan takes a closer look at the curious case of the controversial production.
The 2025 Academy Awards delivered its fair share of surprises on Sunday, but none made a greater impact than Anora, Sean Baker's indie dramedy centering on a Brooklyn stripper's impulsive marriage to the son of a Russian oligarch, emerged as the night's biggest winner, securing 5 Oscars, including Best Picture. While Hollywood celebrated, a broader conversation unfolded online. Social media buzzed with debate over whether Russian culture is finally breaking through the so-called Western cultural wall. One of the film's most discussed aspects is the presence of 2 Russian actors, Mark Eidelstein and Yura Borisov. The latter, nominated for Best Supporting Actor, ultimately lost to Kieran Culkin for his role in A Real Pain, a film shot in Poland. Borisov's nomination was nonetheless historic, marking the first time a Russian actor had been recognized by the Academy since Mikhail Baryshnikov in 1977. But it is Borisov's past filmography that has ignited controversy. Prior to Anora, he played leading roles in Kremlin-backed productions, including a Soviet tank biopic and a film glorifying the inventor of the AK-47.
Do you see milk in
The film's very premise has added another layer to the debate. A story centered on Russian oligarchs living in America arrives at a time when Western governments continue to impose sanctions on Moscow's elites. As Polish film critic Ola Savo notes, the timing is hard to ignore.
Older films, Cold War films, got us used to the notion that when there is a Russian character in the film, that they represent the forces of evil. Here it's very delicate move.
Director Sean Baker maintains that Anora is, at its core, a character study rather than a political statement. But with the war in Ukraine still ongoing, many argue that Hollywood's embrace of Russian talent without openly addressing the conflict raises uncomfortable questions.
This will be a significant week for the future of European security. After the summit, which took place in London, and the events which unraveled in Washington last week, an extraordinary European Council summit is set to take place. Heather Graby, senior fellow at the Bruegel think tank, joins me now to discuss what's next for Ukraine and the EU in terms of security and defense. Good evening and welcome to the program. Thank you for joining.
Good evening.
I guess it's only fair to start with one of the most talked about mishaps in foreign diplomacy, the fiasco between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. What's the path to the negotiating table now? What would have to happen for Zelensky and Trump to sit down together? We've heard from one of our correspondents that Mr. Trump requires a video apology. What's more?
Well, let's see what Trump asks for. I think that drama that Trump created shows very much the performative aspect of his presidency. Right now, where the action is in terms of trying to work out what happens next is in the European side, where we see following the summit in London on Sunday, a lot of concern, a lot of talks between European leaders on what they can do to guarantee Ukraine's security and to ensure continuing support to Zelensky. That's really where the action is, because what Trump is doing is realigning in the United States. This isn't just about Ukraine. Much more fundamentally, this is about Russia. And what Trump clearly did by allowing J.D. Vance to repeat Russian talking points in the meeting, unsubstantiated claims which the Russians have made, was to show that he was prepared to repeat these lines publicly. So what's really important now is that the Europeans reiterate their support. They find a plan to support Ukraine in very practical terms, both financially and militarily. And then what we see the famously unpredictable Trump do next. It's really difficult to negotiate with him because of these kinds of tactics.
And do you think that once Europe shows this sort of support and Mr. Trump sees that there is support from the EU, he's actually going to feel a little warmer when it comes to the idea of meeting Mr. Zelensky at the table?
Very hard to predict that, because there's so many other issues around this in the way that he views the world, and also we don't really know what his long-term strategy is. Is this about trying to get an alliance with Russia with a view to China? It's not that there's a well-worked-out foreign policy doctrine that he has presented, which makes sense of this behavior. What's really fundamental now is to ensure that Europeans look to their own security, that there's a continued understanding among European leaders that Europe can't be secure while Ukraine is not secure, and therefore there needs to be continued European support to Ukraine. But it's also really vital that the Europeans match the good words that they've uttered over the past couple of days with deeds, particularly getting together the funding for defence and ensuring that they have a united line when it comes to Ukraine. Divisions in Europe would be the most dangerous thing at this point.
After the meeting, which took place in London, we've heard from a number of experts, and one of the opinions is the meeting in London delivered plenty promises but few concrete solutions. What's your opinion on this statement?
Well, it's not surprising that it will take a few rounds for leaders to come together. Already the fact that they expressed, all of them, those who were present in London, very firm support for Ukraine and warm welcome for Zelensky is very significant. It showed that they are going to continue their support regardless of Trump's attitude. It was also very significant that they were prepared to start talking in earnest about issues that have been taboo until quite recently. Issues around funding, around joint procurement, really talking about a significant European approach to defence, European security strategy, if you like, which hasn't really been there before. And the fact that they were talking directly to Zelensky is also really significant. These are not things that Europeans are going to do above the heads of Ukrainians. It's with the Ukrainians. So all of that symbolism and their serious talks, and also all the parts of the talks which have not been made public, all of that is significant and will help to move things forward. But yeah, we're not at a very clear peace plan yet, and it will take a while for the practical steps to follow to emerge.
We've heard that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is about to send a letter to EU member state leaders about rearming Europe. How realistic is a plan like this, and how much money actually would it take, and what would be the timeline for such a plan?
Well, there's already a timeline ahead for European leaders to discuss this in some detail. Next Thursday, on the 6th of March, there will be a European Council summit at which Zelensky will again be present. That will be with all 27 EU member states, because remember, in London, you had 14 NATO members. It wasn't all of the EU member states. So next Thursday, all the EU member states will meet and discuss it. Then there will be the presentation of the defence white paper by the Defence Commissioner Kubilius, which is due due on the 19th of March, and that will then be discussed by the member states. And that plan should have more details in it in terms of the funds that are required, because Kubilius and his team have been putting together some quite detailed estimates. I would reckon that we really need to be thinking about 200 to 300 billion. That's going to be something that member states have to come up with in some form, and there are a number of options on the table for how to achieve that level of funding, and also how much of it should be delivered at national level for national procurement and how much should be at EU level. And then there's the question of how much of the procurement should be done by individual countries and how much should be done jointly. Doing it jointly would bring cost savings and efficiencies because of larger orders and more negotiating power by the EU member states. So it makes sense to do that. There are many details to be worked out, but I've never seen in my long years of observing how the EU behaves on these things, such a rapid move towards very concrete funding on defence, and also of getting member states together to make sincere commitments. So I think there's a great deal of political will at the moment, and it would be important for the EU to concretise that into an action plan over the next couple of months. And I expect that they will do that. I think that by now it's very clear that there are a lot of things that can't await the formation of a new coalition government in Germany, and which need decisions earlier than that. So we're seeing a much faster pace of decision making than is normal in the EU.
Let's try and understand the funding behind the rearmament. You mentioned 200 to 300 billion for rearmament. There is a suggestion that funds should come from Cohesion Fund. And the question is, wouldn't this give too much power to the EU Commission to the detriment of the EU member states? What's your opinion on this?
I don't think it's an issue about the Commission. The whole EU budget, the multi-annual financial framework as it's called, is only about 1% of EU GDP. So even if the whole of it were dedicated to defence, that wouldn't be enough. And in any case, a lot of that money is already allocated to agricultural subsidies and also to regional funding. As you say, some of the regional funding could be devoted not to armaments, but to infrastructure which has dual use. So things like upgrading bridges so that they could also be used for tanks, upgrading of airports and other kinds of transport infrastructure, which could also be used for military purposes. So it is possible to use some of the regional funds in this way, but that's a pretty small amount of money in comparison with what's needed. And it wouldn't be directly, for sure, for arms purchases. So I expect there could be some bits of money found in the EU budget, some unspent funds and some redirection of funding, but the bulk of it is going to have to be new money. So that will have to come from national budgets. It may come also from debt financing, either of member states issuing debt themselves in the form of government bonds, or of some kind of special purpose vehicle of joint debt financing. And that's what's being discussed a great deal at the moment. Now, the 200 to 300 billion is what's needed now, probably be more over time, because this is about not only funding support to Ukraine, but also building up the kinds of defense capabilities that European countries would need also to replace all of the strategic assets and enablers that the United States has provided for a long time. So we're nowhere near the end of this. That initial amount of money would be important to raise now to be a deterrent to Russia, and for Europe to be able to build up its strategic autonomy. But I think we've got a number of years ahead of us in which defence will continue to be a major policy and funding priority.
We spoke about the European security, European defense, but we've heard about Finland, together with Norway, actually providing support in developing a peace plan that is already in the works by the United Kingdom and France. But there seems to be some sort of mixed messaging, and I wanted to ask you, do we know what the plan involves, and why is there so little communication around it?
well, I don't know what the plan involves. And it's not surprising that these things are not being made public as they're being negotiated. These are very important and sensitive issues for national governments to decide. And, national leaders have got to explain to their people why such large sums of money would be going into such a plan, and also whether it would involve committing troops. And in what form and how and so on. These are not things that they can thrash out in public as they discuss them with partners. So it's not surprising that this is not being played out in public. Mm-hmm. But it's really important that all of the member states of the EU get on the same page as regards where the threats are coming from and the scale of the response that's needed to those threats.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but unfortunately our time on the program has come to an end. Thank you for joining me, Heather Graby, Senior Fellow at Bruegel. It was a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you. And so this marks the end of World News Tonight. Please do stay tuned here on TVP World and join us for more news and features coming in just a moment.